What's the creepiest thing that has happened to you that still haunts you to this day? My best friend and I were having a sleepover at her house. We were teenagers, and for some reason we were home alone. We're goofing off upstairs when suddenly we hear a crash downstairs. We of course freak out for maybe 30 minutes before we get the nerve to go check it out. I grab a bat and we slowly creep down the steps. In the kitchen, we find a glass bowl had fallen and broke, but the really creepy part is that all the pieces had been picked up and put in another bowl on the table. We still have no idea how that happened. Another time with the same friend, we decided it would be fun to sleep outside in my friend's parents' camper. In the middle of the night I woke up to the silhouette of some guy standing in the doorway. He stands for a minute and then walks out. I was still half asleep and wondering if that really happened when I fell back to sleep. The next morning my friend tells me about a dream she had about someone coming into the camper. Of course, freaking out ensued. Apparently someone, a hobo perhaps, she lives right next to the tracks, had been sleeping in there without anyone knowing. We had an old Shasta trailer, with wings, that we kept on the property next door. Both properties were up next to a park, with a fence. Went to get it ready for a camping trip, found a nicely folded newspaper, a book, a backpack stored in a closet, etc. He'd also evidently used the stove for cooking, pot and pan that weren't ours. Very much appreciated the fact that, despite jimmying the crappy lock and squatting in our vintage trailer, they were extremely tidy. We moved soon after and sold the trailer, but it's nice to think that someone had a dry, safe place to go that winter. My mother was almost unalived by her stalker neighbor when she was younger. Cops suspect he was hiding in the house with a kitchen knife while she was in the house. Luckily she got a creeped out feeling and ran to her grandparents' house. Okay, so when my mom was a youngin', her and her mother lived in a trailer in the backyard of a family member's house. My mom was about 12 at the time that the man in the neighboring house started to stare at her from time to time. She got a creepy vibe from him but figured it was just a harmless lonely guy. One night when my mom was alone, she heard something on the roof of their trailer. Then she heard what sounded like footsteps slowly walking along the metal rooftop. Given they were dirt poor at the time, they did not have a phone, so she eventually ran out of the trailer and into the house without looking on the roof. When her uncle went outside to investigate, nothing was on the roof. A few weeks went by with no incidents and my mom figured she must have been overly scared of nothing. More effed up stuff would randomly happen, but only when she was alone, and it was always spaced out a week or two. If I remember correctly, this occurred over maybe a couple months before it stopped completely. Months go by without any weird instances at all until one night, my mom wakes up to the trailer unbelievably hot. She could feel the heater on full blast. She got out of bed and was about to go to the control for the trailer's heater, but she was overcome with a bad feeling, and decided to just go into the house. The uncle went out to the trailer and noticed that the lock on the door was broken or messed with, and he looked inside quickly but didn't see anything. His wife made him call the police, and when they came out they searched the trailer and found one of the kitchen knives behind a chair next to the heating controller. They suspected that the neighbor went into the trailer, turned the heat up and crouched behind the chair waiting for my mom to come by, and then who knows. It's been a long time since I heard the story, but from what I remember, the cops questioned the neighbor but really couldn't do anything about it. Luckily my mom and grandmother were able to move out of that town right after that. My mom told me that about 5 or something years later she was visiting other family who lived in a nearby town and she saw the neighbor at the grocery store and she bolted out before he saw her. I worked with a lady once who was pretty old, I'd say about 70 years old. Since our job was pretty boring, we talked a lot and she had all kinds of crazy stories. But this one creeps me out still. She said when her grandma died, they had her buried in a wood box in the backyard, as was pretty custom in those days. Well, years later they have a family plot in a cemetery and decide to dig her grandma up to move her to the family plot. She said when they took the lid off the coffin, it had claw marks all over the inside. The grandma had apparently been buried alive. When I was 15, my stepfather got stabbed right in front of me. There was an altercation in the middle of our street at 2 in the morning that woke our whole house up. My stepfather and my uncle were still up drinking, and went outside to see what was going on. There was a young man kicking the shit out of one of our older neighbors, an alcoholic gentleman who lived a few houses down from us. Found out afterward the young man was dating the older man's daughter. My stepfather and uncle went out to break it up, and in the commotion, my stepfather was stabbed by the guy. He stumbled back onto the porch and fell, and I tried to catch him. His blood smeared down the front of my shirt. The younger guy took off and we called 911. We were in the hospital until the early morning. When me and my mom got home there was a message on our answering machine. It was a friend of mine from school, crying and apologizing for calling in the middle of the night, But she had just had a dream that there was screaming and a fight and I was covered in blood. She begged me to call her back. The time stamp on the message was the same time as the stabbing. This is in the late 80s, before computers and even cell phones really. I lived on the other side of town from her. There was no way she could have known what had happened. My great-grandmother once had a repairman come over to fix her water heater in the basement. After he fixed it, he came upstairs and said that my great-grandfather was really helpful. He had died over a year ago. This happened to my friend. She told me that when she was little she was playing with her little brother and sister one night. Her little brother looked out the window and said, "Who is that man?" They all went to the window to see what he was talking about. She said there was a white figure sitting on top of the telephone pole. Looked like a man. He was staring at them with a huge creepy smile. Then he just stood up and jumped off the pole, and simply vanished before they saw him hit the ground. She said it scared them so much, her sister won't even talk about it. My grandmother told me a story that creeps her out still. Back when my grandfather was alive, my grandmother woke up one night to hear something smash downstairs. She woke my grandfather up and made him go check it out with a baseball bat, and when he got downstairs there was a broken flower pot in the middle of their family room floor, about 20 feet from where it usually was. There was no dirt trail, it was just smashed on the floor in the middle of the room, as if someone dropped it straight down. Just a few months ago, while I was still in school, I rented an old house with two of my friends. I lived in the basement and they each had a room upstairs. Several strange things happened to me while I was living in that basement. The first was that I had just gotten a dog and he was about 4 months old at the time. Now and then, right when I turned the TV off to go to sleep, my dog would start whining and growling at one corner of my room. He would usually not get on my bed because he wasn't allowed, but during these times, he would jump on my bed and get as close to me as he could, all without his eyes ever leaving that corner. This happened about 5 times over the course of 4 months. Then, toward the end of the school year, when I was about to move out, the scariest thing that has ever happened to me in my life occurred. Under our stairs was a little door that led to a small space that had a dirt floor. There was also a really weird, old wooden piece of what looks like a map nailed to the inside of the door, so it's a pretty spooky place. Up until the day before this incident, we had kept a small chair in front of this door that I laid my coats and things on, but we had some friends over the night before, so we brought that chair upstairs. It was dark, probably 8 p.m., and I had just been upstairs in the kitchen. I had just gotten off the stairs and was about to open the door to my room, when the door to the little closet under the stairs opened so slowly and with the loudest creak I've ever heard in my life. I stood rooted to the spot, frozen in fear, staring at the closet, waiting for whatever was about to come out of it. I literally stood there for about 5 minutes, absolutely terrified. Eventually, I opened the door to my room and locked it as fast as I could. I wasn't sure if either of my roommates were home, so I called my female roommate and she was there. I spent the rest of that night upstairs with her, still too scared to go back downstairs. I should mention that I'm a 21-year-old man who does not scare easily. Now I know many of you will probably say it was the wind or the fact that I had just come down the stairs or something just as my roommates did, but I've had those things happen to me before and been kind of creeped out, but this was different. The second I heard that closet open, and looked over to see it opening so slowly, I felt this sheer terror. It honestly felt like there was someone or something else in the room with me that wanted me to see that door open. One of my good friends and her daughter took a picture of them kissing each other inside their newly purchased home. In the background, you can clearly see a figure of a little girl who was not present for the photo. After doing research, they found out the house used to be a crematorium. They had ghost experts come in to see if they could find anything and they could not. This picture changed my opinion on ghosts. Kidnapping attempt in the 1980s. Sacramento neighborhood late at night, visiting a friend when I was maybe 9 or 10 years old. 3 of us walk out to go play at this park at an elementary school several blocks away at around 10 p.m. at night. We were playing frisbee in the street in front of the school and our frisbee lands in the street as a white van pulls up and stops, as if to allow us to get our frisbee. I walked toward the van and grabbed the frisbee, then moved to the side to allow the van to pass. As the van passed, the sliding door opened and a guy dressed in black, like a ninja, came flying out and tried to grab me. He had a harness on and the van had been rigged with a telescoping mechanism that allowed him to come out around 5 feet while hanging from this harness, like they do in some haunted houses where people appear to be flying, and it was operated by another person inside, also dressed in black. So there was at least 3 people involved in this attempt. I barely dodged his attempt to grab me, and all three of us ran toward the elementary school and hopped the fence, about 6 feet tall, ran along the fence through bushes and then hopped a second fence, about 15 feet maybe, that allowed us to be inside the school. We were scared as hell and could hear the van driving around and assumed they were in hot pursuit. We found a way to get onto the roof of the school from inside, thank God, and proceeded to observe the van driving around the school for at least 30 minutes in an obvious attempt to find us. This scared us even more because one would think the would-be kidnappers would flee, but I suppose they thought we could identify them. This was before cell phones, so we stayed up there until around 45 minutes after we last saw them. It appeared that some of them were searching for us on foot also, which added to the fear. We eventually escaped and went back to my friend's house, and never told anyone in our family out of fear of being punished. I supervised the night crew, 4 to midnight, at a Subway. The day crew has never mentioned it, but the night crew always make jokes about our sub-ghost, although I've stopped being sure that it's actually a joke. Now hear me out. I'm not saying the Subway I work at is haunted. But I'm not saying it's not haunted either. It's open 24/7, so past midnight just one person stays by themselves until day crew rolls in around 6 a.m., and I always spend at least an hour a night alone, and quite a while with just one other person. Sometimes we hear voices. The music is off, there's only one or two of us, but we can hear people having a conversation, although it's too quiet to pick out words. The first time I heard voices, I looked at my supervisor and asked if she heard them too, and she looks me in the eyes and casually says, "Yeah, it's the sub-ghost talking." It sounds like a joke, but now I realize when I'm training a newbie on the late shift I've given the casual "it's just the sub-ghost" response more times than I can remember. There's voices, there's weird crashing noises, sometimes when no one is in the room things fall off the counters for no discernible reason. Once our owner bought new paper towel auto dispensers to replace the old push dispensers. I was alone right before the graveyard guy came in, when I heard a towel dispense. I walked around the corner and everything was quiet. I was about to walk away when another towel came out. Then another. Then another. Finally it goes full sub-ghost and dispenses the entire roll continuously without stopping, much like when a cat finds out how to unroll your toilet paper. It only stopped when there was no paper left. No one else was around, but a few days later the owner switched them back, so we now have the manual paper towels thingies back. If there is a sub-ghost, she or he's a homie, and I don't really mind. Stupid day crew is oblivious, but us night crew tend to become quite familiar with the sandwich spook, and its presence is so constant. It's a strange night when something isn't explained that by sub-ghost, that the voices have almost become comforting. My mom just recently told me the story of her friend's creepy dad. One night when she was younger she stayed over at this friend's house. Friend's creepy dad offered them fresh venison for dinner. Mom had never had venison, but of course ate it as not to be rude. Friend later tells mom that her dad is not a hunter. Years later we learn that creepy dad had murdered and cannibalized several women over the course of his life. Mom is pretty sure she ate human meat. One time, I was playing fetch with my dog in the upstairs hallway. I would throw the toy over the balcony to the downstairs, and she'd go run to retrieve it and then run back. We were having fun and all was good, but then on the final throw, I hid by the balcony and the door to my sister's room. My dog came back and found me, dropped the toy, and immediately started growling. I moved closer to see what was wrong but she didn't respond, her eyes were fixed behind me. I looked back and there was nothing there, just the white door and white walls. Then I looked into my dog's eyes and I could see myself in the hallway reflected back, and behind me in the reflection was the dark figure of a person. It looked like a woman. We were completely alone up there, my sister and brother were chatting in the kitchen. I noped the fuck out of there and spent the next few hours downstairs. I have to preface this by stating that I am a guy. I used to run quite a bit, 5 miles every day without fail. One day after finishing my run, I got a knock at the door and it was a young man, about my age at the time which was 27, asking about the duplex next door, as it was for rent. Typical questions about the neighborhood and the street and whatnot. I was cordial and informative, but I had some food cooking and needed to get back inside. I told him to call the number on the sign, but before I could excuse myself inside he interjected. The conversation went something like this. Him, wait, do I smell pot? Dude, are you smoking weed in there? Me, no, I'm cooking salmon. Him, oh, cause if you were smoking in there, I'd be totally down with that. By the way, you've got really nice pecs. Do you work out a lot? Me, yeah, I guess. Look, I really gotta go. If you have questions about the duplex, call the number on the sign. Him, cool, thanks. I go back inside the house. He drives off. I instantly call my landlord and tell her to under no circumstances let that guy rent the property. He gave me the creeps. Anyway, fast forward 2 days. It's a Sunday night around midnight. I just finished watching a movie on the couch and I had played a lot of soccer that weekend. Generally, I've found that if I can soak in a hot bath for about 20 minutes, my knees feel better in the morning. So I get up from the couch, walk by my bedroom and notice that, since I'm kind of a restless sleeper, I must have knocked the blinds and curtain adjacent to my bed askew. No biggie, I'll fix it tonight before I go to bed. Then I get into the bathroom and notice that someone must have opened the window to the bathroom when I had friends over several days ago. I don't have a bathroom exhaust fan, so it only makes sense to raise the window and blinds a bit. I close the window and shut the blinds. I've got one of those nifty kitchen timers that I set to 20 minutes and I just sit in there, waiting for the time to expire. During this quiet time, my mind starts replaying the weekend's events and I start to get an uneasy feeling. Subconsciously, I felt something was wrong, but maybe I was just being paranoid. Then I thought about the bedroom window and the bathroom window both having blinds askew. And come to think of it, I believe the blinds behind the TV had one little slat that was sort of peeled up. But, no, now I'm just being paranoid. And I hadn't even thought about the weird encounter from 2 days ago. But now, I'm sitting in a bathtub and the damn timer seems frozen at this point. I tell myself that I'll get up when the timer is done, put on some clothes and take a look around the house. I snapped. 5 minutes left and I couldn't take it any longer. I don't know how to rationalize what I did next. It just seemed purely instinctual. I hopped up, and got a towel around me. I turned off the bathroom light, made my way quickly by the bedroom door and through the living room area. I then cut the kitchen and living room lights. In the darkness, I pulled a pair of pants up so that I was at least wearing something. I wasn't going to go back into the bedroom for a shirt. The only light on in the house was my bedroom light. I went over to the front door and flung it open quickly to peer out. Nothing. Crickets. This was the middle of the summer. And the crickets were overwhelmingly loud. Louder than the sound of my squeaky storm door opening. I decided I was being paranoid, and turned to go back in. I turned, but at the last second I had that thought, I won't be content to sleep tonight unless I properly dismiss the paranoia with a walk around the house. So, I barefootedly and cautiously make my way down the front porch stairs, and down the sidewalk to the side of my house where the bedroom windows glow. The front of the house is definitely clear. I tiptoe to the corner of the house to get a view of the side of the house. As I peer around the corner, not 20 feet away from me, I see the stranger from 2 days ago, his face glued to the bedroom window. His hand is in his shorts and he is masturbating furiously. I'm instantly enraged. Apparently, he is completely unaware that I have exited the house, much less flanked him. I decided in that instant to surprise him. The following conversation was a mix between my anger, his fear, and most strangely of all, the feeling of amusement that this is actually happening to me. Keep in mind, the conversation doesn't really make a lot of sense because he didn't really have time to think. And it really couldn't have been more than about 15 to 20 seconds before the ordeal was played out. Me, you sick fuck. Him, surprised and mortified. Ah, me, I'm going to catch you and beat the shit out of you. Him, you don't know me? Backing away. Me, aggressively approaching. I know exactly who you are, and I'm going to catch you and beat the shit out of you. Him, transitioning from backing away to turning away and starting to run. Please don't hurt me. I'm so sorry. I'm so drunk. I'm so sorry. Please don't hurt me. At this point, it's an all-out chase across a neighbor's yard. I'm wearing nothing but a pair of warm-up pants, but I'm gaining on him. I was playing soccer daily at the time, so I was definitely going to catch him. But he made it easy. I chased him across one gravel driveway, which wasn't fun, but I was on his heels by the time he reached the second one and he took a nasty fall right into the middle of the gravel. At this point, I very nearly kicked him across the face with my shin, but I suppressed the urge. I need my license to practice my profession in my state, and I've already chased this guy across someone else's property, not to mention the threats. Also, quite pathetically, he is crying and bleeding and pleading with me in a very effeminate voice, a completely different voice from the only other encounter. I tell him to get up. At this point he knows he is caught, so he is completely compliant, well, kind of. I ask him where he parked. He lied and said a few blocks down. I take his keys from him and tell him we're going to his car. I ask him his name. He tells me. We walk about 30 feet and he stops and says, "Actually, this is my car." Wow, okay, so you parked basically right next to my house. So, I open his car and he's like, "What are you doing?" I explain to him that there's no way for me to know who he is. He has no wallet with him. At this point I've got his cell phone and keys. I open his glove box hoping to find some real ID. Bingo. I found a receipt for tire rotation or something. The car shown on the receipt matches the car he's driving. But the name doesn't. I call him by the name on the receipt and he starts crying again and apologizing about lying about his name. At this point, I'm convinced I have him scared shitless, and I just want to go to bed. I know cops will take hours and it's already like 1 o'clock and I've got to be up early. So, I take the little folder thing the receipt came in and I told him to write down a confession of what he did. It was only just becoming apparent to me that not only was he a peeking Tom, he had come into my house when I wasn't there to adjust the blinds in order to see in. Anyway, I call him a sick fuck a couple more times after that dawns on me. Now I've got a written and signed confession. I write his license plate down and then I decide to make sure I never have to see this guy again. I take his phone and write down numbers of obvious relatives, mom, dad, uncle someone or another. Just a few. And then I tell him that I don't know if I'm going to call the cops, but if I ever see you again, I'm going to try to kill you. I had no such intentions. It'd be hard for me to hurt someone unless they were hurting someone I cared about, but he didn't know that. I made it clear for him that if he saw me somewhere, he'd better make sure I don't see him. Anyway, at this point he's sitting in his car. I toss the keys and the cell phone into his car and tell him to get lost. He sits in the car sobbing for a while I'm walking away, but he's got the engine started and leaving by the time I'm back in my house. At this point, I sit down and drink a beer. And then I decide I wish I had called the cops because I'm not getting any sleep. I call the cops to show them the confession and all the information. The cop who shows up writes a few things down. He tells me I should have detained him. I give him all the info. 2 days later, I call the cops and ask them about a report. No news. And no news would come. No report. Oh well, he's never coming back. Wrong. He knocks on my door about a year later. I open the door. He must have seen the anger. He backs away from the door with his hands up and says he came to apologize. Said he was very sorry. I told him I accepted his apology and to not fuck up like that again. And then he said, thanks and walked away. Very strange.